Anika Pichai was not the kind of girl who enjoyed being in the spotlight. She was shy, soft-spoken, and always preferred her laptop and books over cameras or microphones. Though her father, Sundar Pichai, was one of the most well-known people in the tech world, she didn't want to be known just as his daughter. She wanted to earn respect in her own way, quietly and honestly. While her friends watched movies or posted selfies on social media, Anika spent most of her free time learning about artificial intelligence. From the age of 12, she had become fascinated with how machines could learn like humans. But more than that, she wanted to understand how AI could help people fairly, especially those who were often ignored or left behind. She once read a story about how some job hiring systems used AI in a way that gave unfair results. That bothered her deeply. She told herself, if machines are going to make decisions for people, they better be fair. Her bedroom looked more like a mini-lab. She had whiteboards full of notes, books stacked in every corner, and small machines she built herself from old parts. She didn't care about brands or fashion. Most days, she wore her favorite gray hoodie and simple jeans. She was a normal teenager. With one small difference, her ideas were far from ordinary. One evening, Anika received an email that made her sit up straight. It was from the Global Youth Innovation Council. She had entered a project into their Tech for Good competition a few months earlier, but hadn't thought much about it since. The email said she had not only been selected as a finalist, but was also invited to speak at the Future of Tech and Ethics Summit at Harvard University. The event was famous for featuring world-class thinkers, and it was a dream for any tech lover. At first, she thought it was a mistake. Me? At Harvard? Speaking? She whispered to herself. Her hands shook a little as she clicked the next link. It was real. She showed it to her parents, and Sundar smiled with pride but didn't say much. He knew Anika didn't like a big fuss. Well, he said calmly, looks like they saw what I've always known. Her mother hugged her tightly and said, just be yourself, that's more than enough. In the days leading up to the trip, Anika felt nervous. She wasn't scared of speaking in public, though that made her uneasy too. But more of being misunderstood or ignored. She was young, and she knew how people often judged age before they listened to ideas. Still, she prepared well. She fine-tuned her small project, practiced her words, and even rehearsed how to respond to tough questions. The night before leaving, she sat beside her father at the kitchen table. He looked at her with a thoughtful expression. You know, Harvard professors can be sharp, he said. Some might challenge you hard. But that's okay. You don't have to win. Just speak the truth. Be curious, be kind, and listen as much as you speak. Anika nodded. I'm not going to argue with anyone. I just want to share what I found. Her father smiled again and gave her a small nod. Then you're already ahead of most. When they arrived in Boston, Anika was surprised by how cold the air felt, compared to California. She clutched her laptop bag tightly as they walked into the conference building. The Harvard campus was grand and full of history. The walls seemed to whisper the stories of great thinkers who had walked those halls. The conference was buzzing with excitement. Attendees included professors, researchers, tech leaders, and university students from all over the world. Everyone wore professional clothes, and the conversations were filled with words like algorithmic equity, data architecture, and machine learning pipelines. Anika felt a little out of place. Some people smiled politely at her, but most didn't take her seriously. She overheard one man whisper to his colleague, "That's Sundar Pichai's kid, right? They probably let her in just for that." Anika pretended not to hear it. She quietly found her seat backstage and opened her laptop to review her notes. As she read through her slides, a woman approached her. "You're on the panel with Dr. Carlton Mears, right?" she asked kindly. Anika nodded. She had read about him before. Dr. Mears was a famous Harvard professor known for his strong opinions and fast talking. He had published many papers on AI and ethics, but some younger voices found his views old-fashioned. Still, he was respected, and Anika knew he would be a strong voice on the panel. When the panelists gathered for a short introduction meeting, Dr. Mears barely glanced at Anika. He nodded once and then continued talking to another professor beside him. No one was rude, but no one expected much from her either. Annika stayed quiet, listened carefully, and took mental notes. The event was being held in a large hall with a stage, lights, and cameras. It would be streamed live to thousands of viewers around the world. Annika felt her stomach flutter as the host began to introduce the panelists. Joining us today, the host said, are some of the brightest minds in the field of technology and ethics, including a young innovator whose work may surprise you. The audience clapped as each panelist took their seat. Dr. Mears spoke first, giving a long and confident answer about the dangers of too much emotion in AI design. Another expert followed, talking about privacy and data safety. When it was Annika's turn, the host simply said, "Sundar Pichai, your thoughts?" She felt the microphone in front of her. For a second, everything went silent in her mind. Then, she looked into the crowd, took a deep breath, and began to speak. Not loudly, not with big hand movements, but clearly and with calm. "I think machines should be more than smart," she said. "They should be fair, and for that they need to understand where humans have been unfair in the past." Her voice didn't shake. She explained how she had built a simple AI model that could spot hidden bias in training data, especially in areas like hiring, lending, and school admissions. The audience listened quietly. She didn't know it yet, but something inside the room was shifting. She finished her short introduction and sat down quietly. There were still many parts of the discussion left, but something had started. Even the camera operator zoomed in, sensing that this quiet teenager had more to offer than anyone expected. Annika didn't come to impress anyone. She came to share a truth she believed in. What happened next would be beyond anything she had imagined. Annika sat quietly backstage, waiting for her name to be called again. The panel discussion had just started, and even though she had introduced her idea briefly, she knew the real test was still ahead. The next round would involve deeper conversation, questions from the host, comments from fellow panelists, and even reactions from the live audience. The thought made her heart beat a little faster. Around her, the other panelists were relaxed. They were experienced professionals, used to large crowds, live cameras, and public debates. Dr. Carlton Mears, the well-known Harvard professor, leaned back comfortably in his chair. He had already spoken once, and his voice had filled the room with confidence. He spoke fast, used long academic words, and made his opinions sound like facts. The audience nodded along, impressed by his presence. Annika had studied many of Dr. Mears's papers before. He was known for being smart, but also very firm in his views. He believed that artificial intelligence needed strict human control, and that young people often didn't understand the complexity of ethics in technology. In one article, he had even written that teenage minds lack the depth required to build responsible systems. That line had stayed in Annika's memory, not because it hurt, but because it motivated her. The moderator asked the next question. "Dr. Mears, how do you respond to those who say current AI systems are still failing to treat people equally, especially when it comes to race or background?" Dr. Mears smiled slightly and leaned toward the microphone. "AI is not magic. It reflects the data we feed into it. If there's bias, the problem is not the AI, it's us. That's why I don't believe a high school science project can fix structural bias. It's a deep academic challenge." Annika heard the words clearly. Though he hadn't mentioned her name, everyone in the room knew who he was referring to. A few people glanced toward her, some with concern, others with interest. She didn't feel angry, just focused. She reminded herself what her father had told her. "Be calm, speak the truth, and let your work do the talking." The moderator turned to her. "Annika, do you want to respond to that?" She picked up the microphone gently. "I agree that bias starts with humans," she said slowly. "But I also believe that waiting for perfect systems isn't the answer. We have to build tools that can identify the bias early, so we don't repeat our mistakes again and again." There was a pause in the room. People listened closely. She went on, explaining how her AI model worked, not in technical terms, but in everyday language. She described how it scanned datasets and flagged areas where certain groups were underrepresented or misrepresented. Her voice stayed steady, and she made sure to include simple examples, like how a college admissions algorithm might unknowingly favor certain schools over others, leaving out talented students from less-known areas. Dr. Mears raised his eyebrows slightly. "And how exactly does your model determine what's fair?" he asked. "Fairness is not a math equation." Annika nodded. "You're right. Fairness isn't one size fits all. That's why my system doesn't decide what's fair. It only shows where the patterns are uneven. The decision still belongs to people, but now they have better information." Some heads in the audience started to nod. One woman in the front row whispered something to her colleague and smiled. The moderator looked impressed. "Interesting," he said. "Can you show us how it works?" Annika opened her laptop and connected it to the screen. Her hands moved quickly but calmly. Within seconds, a simple, clean interface appeared for everyone to see. "This is a sample data set from a mock scholarship program," she explained. "Let's run the analysis." She clicked a button and the system began working. On the screen, colorful bars appeared, showing how different groups had been scored. One group clearly had lower average scores, even though their application strength was similar. Annika highlighted the pattern. "This doesn't mean someone made a bad choice on purpose," she said. "But it does show that something in the data caused unfair results." A soft murmur moved through the crowd. The simplicity of the display, combined with the clarity of her voice, made people lean in. Even those who didn't understand much about AI could see what she was saying. Dr. Mears looked at the screen, then back at her. "Interesting," he said again. "But these are just visuals. What about deeper models? Neural networks, decision trees. Have you tested those?" Annika nodded again. "Yes, I've tested it on more complex systems too. This version is simplified for display, but I've done back-end testing on convolutional networks and real-world data." She didn't mention it, but one of those tests had caught a flaw in one of Dr. Mears' earlier papers. She had found that a widely used model was accidentally filtering out non-English resumes even when language wasn't supposed to matter. She had built a patch for it, but had never made a big deal out of it. She paused for a second, then said gently, "Actually, this system helped find a data filter error in a 2019 public model. That model was designed by your lab, Professor Mears. I believe your team updated it last year after several researchers raised concerns." Dr. Mears looked at her carefully. He didn't speak for a moment. The audience was silent too. Then he nodded slowly. "You're right," he said. "I remember that we had missed something in the language filter. Good catch." Annika smiled politely and returned to her seat. She hadn't meant to prove anyone wrong. She just wanted to show that even someone young could ask the right questions and build something useful. The moderator looked around the room and said, "Well, I think we've just witnessed something special. Let's take a short break before audience Q&A." As the lights softened and the music played gently in the background, people in the audience began whispering excitedly. One student turned to her friend and said, "Did you see that? She just held her ground with a Harvard professor." Another person pulled out their phone and typed a message. "This girl is going to change everything." Backstage, Annika took a sip of water. Her hands were no longer shaking. She felt something shift, not in the world, but inside herself. All the quiet years of hard work, the lonely nights with books and code, the times she had doubted her own voice, they had all led to this moment. Her father came to her quietly. He didn't say anything at first. Then he put his hand gently on her shoulder and smiled. "You were brilliant, not because of what you proved, but because of how you stayed true to who you are." Annika looked at him, and for the first time, in a long while, she didn't feel like a shadow of someone famous. She felt like herself, ready for whatever came next. The break between the panel sessions felt shorter than Annika had expected. People were still buzzing with excitement, talking in small groups, and glancing toward her now and then. A few students even walked over to her during the break. One girl from a university in Canada said, "That was amazing, you made it so easy to understand. I've been afraid of learning AI because it felt too complicated. But now I actually want to try." Annika smiled and thanked her politely. She wasn't used to compliments from strangers. It was new, and a little awkward, but also nice. Backstage, she noticed the atmosphere had changed. Before the session began, most people barely noticed her. Now even the older panelists looked at her with more curiosity, maybe even respect. Dr. Mears gave her a short nod as he passed by. He didn't say much, but the gesture meant something. She could feel it. The host came back on stage and invited the audience to sit down again. "Welcome back, everyone," he said. "We now begin the Q&A portion of our panel discussion. We've received dozens of questions from students, professors, and tech professionals around the world, both in person and online." The screen behind the panelists lit up with the first question: what's more important, building powerful AI or building responsible AI? The host smiled. "A big one to start with. Dr. Mears, would you like to begin?" Dr. Mears leaned forward. "Power is only helpful when used correctly, so responsibility must come first. That said, responsibility without skill is like a car without an engine. You need both. And that's where training and standards come in." Then he turned toward Annika. "But maybe our youngest panelist here can share a fresher perspective." Annika wasn't expecting that, but she didn't hesitate. "I agree," she said. "Power and responsibility should grow together. But sometimes responsibility comes too late. People build systems, and only after something goes wrong they try to fix it. I think it's better to ask ethical questions before the code is even written." The audience nodded. A professor from the front row whispered to his student, "That's exactly what we try to teach in my class." But she said it better. The next question came up on the screen. "How do you deal with failure in your projects?" This time Annika was the first to respond. "Failure is the only reason I've improved," she said honestly. "My first AI project didn't even run. The second gave random results. The third one crashed my computer. But every time I learned something. That's the secret. Fail fast, learn faster." The room chuckled gently and a few people clapped. Her honesty was refreshing in a space where most speakers tried to sound perfect all the time. Then came a moment no one expected. A hand went up in the audience, not from a student, but from a gray-haired woman wearing a Harvard badge. She was a professor from the School of Law. The host gave her the mic. "Annika," she said kindly, "what would you say to a policymaker who argues that AI decisions should only be made by licensed adults?" Annika paused for a second. It was a deep question, and an important one. "I would ask them to look at the internet," she replied. "Many of the world's most popular apps were created by young people, not because they had all the answers, but because they saw problems in a new way. Age should not be the first filter. Idea should be." The room burst into applause, this time louder. Some people even stood up briefly, clapping with real emotion. Cameras zoomed in, the live stream chat filled with comments. "Wow, she's incredible." That answer gave me chills. We need more minds like hers. The final question on the screen was, who inspires you the most? Everyone expected her to say her father. After all, Sundar Pichai was sitting in the front row, and his success was known all over the world. But Annika smiled softly and said something unexpected. "My mother," she said. "She's not in the tech world, but she always told me to ask questions even if they made people uncomfortable. She reminded me that kindness is also a form of intelligence. I think that's shaped everything I do." Her mother, sitting beside Sundar, looked surprised and deeply touched. She wiped the corner of her eye quietly. The audience gave another round of applause, this one gentle and warm. As the event came to a close, the host stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, this panel has given us knowledge, clarity, and inspiration. Let's give a huge round of applause to all our speakers, and especially to a young voice who reminded us that brilliance doesn't wait for age." The audience stood up again, a full standing ovation. Annika looked around, stunned. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. She had only wanted to share her small project, maybe spark a discussion, but now, she had moved a room full of thinkers and leaders. It didn't feel real. As she walked off stage, people started approaching her. Some wanted to ask more questions. Others just wanted to shake her hand. A few professors gave her their cards saying things like, "If you ever want to collaborate, reach out," or "We'd love to feature your project at our research center." She did her best to smile and thank each one, though she still found the sudden fame a little overwhelming. After a while, she excused herself to get a bit of fresh air. Outside the hall, the sun was setting, and the sky turned orange and pink. The cool breeze felt nice on her face. She sat on a bench under a tree and took a deep breath. Her thoughts were racing, but her heart felt calm. Just then, Sundar Pichai walked out and joined her. He didn't say anything right away. He just sat beside her and looked at the sky too. After a few moments, he said, "You know, I was nervous for you." Annika turned to him, surprised. "You were?" He nodded. "Not because I thought you'd fail, but because I know how the world sometimes doubts young people. I worried they wouldn't really listen." "And?" she asked. "They listened," he said with a smile. "You didn't just speak. You changed something in the room." Annika looked down at her shoes, then back at the sunset. "It still feels unreal." Her father put a hand on her shoulder gently. "That's how real moments feel. Quiet, but unforgettable." They sat there for a while, watching the evening sky turn deeper in color. People walked by, some smiling as they recognized her. But she wasn't thinking about the crowd anymore. She was thinking about the journey ahead. She knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The next morning, Annika woke up early. Sunlight was peeking through the curtains of her hotel room. She sat up slowly, her mind still full of everything that had happened the day before. It felt like a dream, speaking on a panel with experts, getting a standing ovation, and answering questions that even professionals found difficult. Her phone had been buzzing with messages all night. Some were from classmates congratulating her. Others were from people she didn't even know, students from other countries, tech leaders, and even a few journalists. Everyone had seen the panel discussion online. Clips from the event were already going viral. But Annika didn't rush to check her phone. Instead, she walked over to the window and looked out. From high up in the hotel building, she could see the whole city waking up. Cars were moving slowly through the streets, and people walked with coffee cups in their hands. It made her feel peaceful. No matter how big yesterday felt, life kept going, and that was a good thing. She sat at the small table near the window and opened her laptop. Her project, the bias-detecting AI tool, was still running some background data checks. She noticed a few improvements she could make, so she started typing. Her fingers moved quickly, her focus strong. For her, writing code was like building tiny bridges between questions and answers. As she worked, there was a soft knock on the door. It was her father, Sundar Pichai, holding 2 cups of tea. He smiled. "You've been up for a while," she smiled back. "Just fixing a few things." He handed her a cup. "Still thinking about yesterday?" "A little," she said. "Mostly just thinking about what's next." Her father sat down across from her. "That's the right way to think. Success is not a place you reach, it's a path you walk." They sat quietly for a while, sipping tea. Then Annika said, "I wasn't sure if I should have mentioned Dr. Mirza's model during the panel. I didn't want to embarrass him." Her father nodded thoughtfully. "I think you handled it well. You shared facts, not opinions. You respected his work while pointing out something important. That's how progress happens, through honest and respectful conversations." Annika felt relieved. She had wondered if people would think she was showing off, but deep down she knew her goal had never been to outshine anyone. She just wanted to help make systems better and fairer for everyone. Later that day, they returned to the conference venue. A special follow-up session had been added to the event schedule, titled Young Minds, Big Ideas. Annika had been invited to join a small group of young innovators who were each doing exciting work in different fields: clean energy, medical tech, space exploration, and social impact apps. The room for the session was smaller than the main stage, but every seat was full. People stood along the walls, eager to hear more from the young speakers. The moderator introduced Annika first. You may remember her from yesterday's main panel. Please welcome back Sundar Pichai. As she stepped forward, there was applause again. Not as loud as before, but more personal, like people were truly glad to see her again. This time, Annika didn't have a screen or slides. She had decided to speak from her heart. When I first started building AI tools, she began, I wasn't trying to change the world. I was just trying to solve one small problem. Why do some people get fewer opportunities than others, even when they work just as hard? She talked about growing up watching people around her work hard, her school bus driver, the lady at the library, the man who ran the food stall near her home. She noticed how talented some of them were, but they didn't always have the same chances. I realized that fairness is not just about treating people equally, she said. It's about noticing who's being left out and asking, why? She shared a few stories of how her tool had helped school counselors make better decisions, or how a university professor had used it to adjust the way they selected students for scholarships. By the time she finished, the room was quiet. Not because people were bored, but because they were thinking. Her words had touched something deep. Then came the next surprise. One of the panelists, a 19-year-old inventor from Brazil, stood up and said, Can I ask you something, Annika? She nodded. How did you learn to speak so clearly about something so technical? I get nervous even saying the word algorithm in public. The room chuckled softly. Annika smiled. I used to be nervous too, but then I realized, if people don't understand what we're building, they can't be part of the solution. And if our ideas only stay in books or labs, they won't help anyone. That simple answer led to a longer conversation. Soon, the session turned into a friendly round-table chat. The young speakers asked each other questions, shared advice, and even laughed about their small mistakes. It felt more like a group of friends talking than a formal event. One student from the audience stood up and said, This is the most inspiring session I've been to. You all give me hope for the future. By the end of the session, several people asked if Annika would be willing to mentor young coders or run online workshops. A few educators suggested creating a version of her AI tool for school teachers. The room was full of ideas, energy, and connection. Outside the hall, as people walked out, Annika noticed a group of young girls gathered near the entrance. One of them, around 12 years old, walked up shyly. Hi, she said softly. I saw your video from yesterday. It made me want to try coding. Annika knelt down so she was eye level. That's amazing. Do you like solving puzzles? The girl nodded excitedly. Then you're already halfway there. Start small, stay curious, and never be afraid to ask questions. The girl smiled wide, then ran back to her friends. Annika stood up, feeling something deep inside her shift. The moment was small, but meaningful. That one sentence, that short conversation, it might start something new for that girl. And that to Annika felt bigger than any applause. Back at the hotel that evening, Annika opened her notebook. Not a laptop this time, a simple notebook with blank pages. She started sketching a new idea, a beginner-friendly coding platform that teaches fairness and ethics along with technology. Not just for students in big cities or top schools, but for everyone. Her father peeked into the room. Still working? Annika looked up and smiled. Just dreaming. He smiled back. That's where all good things begin. She nodded, then returned to her notebook. Her heart was calm, but her mind was full of ideas. The world was listening now. And she was ready to speak, not just with her voice, but with her work. The days following the conference felt like a whirlwind for Annika. Once quiet and private, her life was now filled with attention. News articles began to appear online with headlines like, Teen Innovator Sparks New Debate in AI Ethics, and The Voice of the Future is Just 16 Years Old. A clip of her calmly answering the question from the Harvard professor was being shared across social media. People from around the world were tagging her name, praising her clarity and confidence. Even her school principal called to say how proud the entire school was of her. But while many teenagers might get carried away with such attention, Annika remained calm. She continued her routine, waking up early, working on her coding projects, and attending her online school lessons. The sudden fame didn't distract her. In fact, it gave her a new sense of responsibility. One morning, as she was eating breakfast, her inbox pinged with a new email. It was from the office of a well-known global education foundation. They had watched her session and wanted to speak with her about creating a global youth tech fellowship. They believed her voice and leadership could help guide other young students. She read the email twice to make sure it was real. Then she quietly showed it to her parents. Her mother smiled, full of pride, and said, "You've been planting seeds for a long time, Annika. Now the world is seeing them grow." Her father, Sundar, nodded and added, "Just remember, every new step is also a new responsibility." Annika agreed. She didn't want to chase fame. She wanted to create something meaningful. That week, she had several meetings with educators, scientists, and student leaders. She listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and began forming the idea of a learning program that taught not just coding, but how to use it for good. She called the project CodeKind. The idea was simple: a free online platform where students from any country, any background, could learn how to build AI tools while also learning about fairness, kindness, and impact. The lessons would be taught in simple language, include real-life stories, and offer creative challenges like build an app to help your community or design a bot that makes someone smile. To test her idea, she created a basic version of the website. With the help of a few volunteers, some of whom had reached out to her after the conference, she added lesson videos, quizzes, and projects. She even included a special section where students could upload their ideas and receive feedback from mentors. To her surprise, within just 1 week of launching CodeKind, students from over 20 countries signed up. Many of them left messages saying things like, "I always thought AI was too hard, but now I'm excited to try. I want to build something for my village. Thank you for making learning feel safe and fun." Annika spent hours each day answering questions, helping troubleshoot code, and celebrating small wins with the new students. She also started recording short videos explaining complicated AI topics in simple terms, often using funny examples or easy metaphors. These videos became very popular, especially with younger students. One afternoon, Annika received a letter from a girl in a remote town in Nepal. She had no computer of her own, but went to the local library every weekend to use the public one. In the letter, she wrote, "Your website is the only place where I don't feel behind. I want to become someone like you, not because of the stage or the claps, but because you care." That letter meant more to Annika than any news article or award. She kept it in her drawer and read it often when she needed motivation. Meanwhile, more universities and tech organizations started inviting her to speak. But Annika chose her events carefully. She only accepted those that focused on education, ethics, or student innovation. She didn't want to be a celebrity. She wanted to be useful. At one youth summit in Singapore, Annika shared a story about her first failed project and how it taught her to keep going. After her talk, a boy from Kenya came up and said, "I thought I was the only one who struggled. Now I feel strong again." Each time someone said something like that, Annika felt her purpose grow stronger. Back at home, her life was still very normal. She helped her mom with cooking, played board games with her younger cousin, and sometimes sat quietly with her father on the balcony talking about books and ideas. She loved those peaceful moments. They reminded her to stay grounded. One evening, while updating CodeKind, she noticed a new submission from a user named Starbuilder. It was a simple chatbot designed to comfort people feeling sad. When Annika tested it, the bot replied with messages like, "I'm sorry your day is hard, but I believe you're stronger than you think. Would you like to hear a funny animal fact?" She smiled. It wasn't a perfect chatbot, but it was full of heart. Annika shared it on the homepage with a note, "Built with care, proof that kindness can be coded." A few weeks later, CodeKind crossed 100,000 users. Annika and her small team celebrated with cupcakes and a video call. They didn't have a big office or expensive tools, just a shared passion to make learning open and joyful. Then came another surprise. An international research group working with the United Nations invited Annika to join a youth advisory panel. They were building global guidelines for ethical AI use and wanted her input, especially from the point of view of young people. At the first meeting, several adults spoke in technical terms and long sentences. When it was Annika's turn, she kept it simple. We can't build fair tools if we forget the people using them. Let's make sure every voice is part of the conversation, especially the quiet ones. There was a long pause, and then slow, thoughtful nods. Annika wasn't just part of the conversation now. She was helping guide it. One day, while walking in her neighborhood park, she noticed a group of children gathered around a phone. She walked over and saw that they were watching one of her learning videos. One of the kids looked up and shouted, "That's her." They laughed and asked her to explain what a bias meant in AI. She bent down and used simple words, pointing to the sand, sticks, and shadows to help them understand. When she walked home that evening, she felt light and full of hope. She knew the world was still full of challenges, technology that moved too fast, people left behind, and questions with no easy answers. But she also knew something else. A spark could come from anywhere. A change could begin with a whisper. And a kind idea, shared at the right time, could move the world. Annika wasn't chasing applause anymore. She was building bridges between minds, between ages, and between possibilities. And this was only the beginning.